Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Dragon Ball Nation. Now I have a video that a couple of my subscribers, a good amount of them have asked me a question, and it's whether to get Raging Blast 2 or Raging Blast 1. A couple of them have asked this, and I kind of wanted to do a video to really go into the details of what the differences between the games are, because there are a lot, but not a lot at the same time. And I mean this isn't if you owned Raging Blast 1 when Raging Blast 2 came out, there really wasn't a whole reason to spend $60 on it. But that's basically what I'm going to be talking about today, going into little intricacies of what is different between the two games and which one I think is better. Because if you saw my top 5 Dragon Ball Z games, which I'll leave a link into that in the description below, I did say that they were both at my number 3 spot. So I didn't put one above the other, and let's see if that still holds true to this video. The first category I'm going to talk about real quick is game modes, and this is where a lot of people will very clearly say which one they think will be a better game, or they'll give it a big advantage to one or the other. And as far as game modes go, both games have an online mode, tournament mode in the Cell games, a normal, versus mode. But what's different is in Raging Blast 2, there's a battle zone, which is kind of like a mission type mode, or maybe like a ladder, a series of fights that you get up to, and you can unlock skills and stuff like that through there. And Raging Blast 1, on the other hand, has a similar battle mode, but it's a series of power battles where you try to get a high enough power level by doing certain objectives in those modes. There's the machine that Videl and all the other Z fighters would hit for the World Tournament. There's one of those in the first game, as well as some other stuff as well. There is a similar ladder mode that's kind of similar to the Battle Zone for Raging Blast 2. But I think as far as those modes right there, I'd say that I prefer what Raging Blast 1 had, because there was a bigger variety. But then the big thing is that Raging Blast 2 doesn't have a story mode. It has a Galaxy mode, and you pick a character and go through their Galaxy mode, and it's really just a series of fights. Some of them don't exactly make sense in a story way, but some of them are going through the motions of the actual series. Like, you could play as I guess you could play as Goku and then go through what Goku would do for fights in the series, similar to how Budokai 3 story mode was, where you would just play as Goku and go through his fights, and there will be some side stuff on the side, obviously. And there's also dialogue in combat for Versus and the Galaxy mode. It's across all boards. There's specific dialogue that'll play depending on what characters are fighting each other. Like Frieza and Goku will say specific lines to each other. Now, Raging Blast 1 has an actual story mode, and it's actually pretty well produced. It's better than the other Tenkaichi style game story mode, unless you want to maybe compare it to Tenkaichi 2, which had it had an overworld similar to Budokai 3, but Raging Blast 1 had an actual story mode, and it was quite long actually. It had many what-if missions as well. Now, before I get into the discussion of the graphics, which is a big deal to me, and some of the aesthetic changes, there is a bonus movie with the Raging Blast 2 game, and it's Plan to Eradicate the Super Saiyans, which is a remake of the Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans film that was from like the 80s, and it's only in Japanese, and it's actually not even that good in my opinion. It's one of my most hated Dragon Ball Z movies, I would say, and I will do a top 10 list in the future of that, definitely. But other than that, get into the graphics. The graphics in Raging Blast 1 are phenomenal. I don't think many people will disagree with that, and the character models themselves just look very close to the anime, especially when you get into some of the levels that have a little bit more I don't want to say absolutely dynamic lighting, but they do have different lighting effects, like Destroyed Namek. They just look very similar to their anime counterparts, closer than most DBZ games get in general. It is really one of the closest looking to the anime. Now, I do think that Bursum is the best looking of any Dragon Ball Z game, but it doesn't necessarily have to look like the anime to be the best looking. Now, if I go to Raging Blast 2, the graphics in those, as far as the environments, are a little bit upgraded, but technically speaking, it is a better looking game, but not by much. There are some new effects, like some new lightning lightning special effects on the character, and some of the supers, when you smash into rocks and stuff, will have electricity around them, which weren't in Raging Blast 1. But the characters, from what you can see on screen, are very plastic looking, and that's what I feel like. They look like toys almost. Not the models themselves, but like the shaders and the texture work on them are just much more, they just look like toys really, and I don't know what the change was for. It didn't seem like there really needed to be a reason to change them at all, but it's really distracting when you go from that game to Raging Blast 2 to 1 and see the jump in quality there. Now the graphics aren't worse, they're just a different style, and it doesn't appeal to me personally. I guess I could see why someone would prefer it, but it's up to you to decide if you prefer that or not. But remember that graphics don't make a good game. Another thing to mention that people may or may not care about is that the customization of Raging Blast 1, in my opinion, for the stat increasing and all that, is far superior to Raging Blast 2. Raging Blast 2 is very simplistic, and in Raging Blast 1 you get this sort of a grid looking thing to play around with, and you get to put all the blocks into that space. If anyone's used it at all, they know what I'm talking about. But it's a much deeper system. There's a lot of there's just a lot more things you can add to it, and I feel like Raging Blast 2 is lacking in that department. Now, to quickly go over the character roster, which is a big deal for many people, especially fans of Tenkaichi 3. That was one of the big selling points for fans, at least, for that game. The character roster in Raging Blast 1 is a decently sized 73, rather, if you want to count transformations, and if you don't, it's around 40. It's around the same as Budokai 3 had. It's very comparable. Now, Raging Blast 2 has up to 100 characters, but if you don't count transformations, it's around 66. New characters that are in Raging Blast 2 are a lot of the movie villains, and there are some new ones that haven't been in Dragon Ball Z games much at all. But we have Super Janemba, Deborah, Turles, Future Gohan, Super Saiyan Future Gohan, Pikkon, Nail. I could go down a big list. Ultimate Gohan was not in the first Raging Blast, so if anyone was curious about that, he was not in the first one, which is kind of silly. Neither was Cooler. Cooler is in Raging Blast 2 as well as Meta Cooler. There are some other ones, some kind of exclusive ones, I guess you could say. As far as I know, they aren't really in any other Dragon Ball Z games. Are Android 13, 14, 15, and Super Android 13. And they're pretty fun to play around with. Well, at least Android 13 is. But, I mean, the character roster is definitely, obviously, a lot bigger. Now, as far as gameplay goes with Raging Blast 1 and 2, it is a big difference, but it's also a not. The base feel of the game is the same in both. Raging Blast 2 arguably does have more depth to it, but it's to a degree that it makes the game too simple in a way, because the combos are, if you want to even call them combos, are much easier to execute. It's really just hitting the Y button and pushing a direction. It's not really a big combo. I found that Raging Blast 1 had a more methodical feel, even though I still didn't find it to be very skill based. It can be very spam heavy, but it was much in Raging Blast 1, and this could be to the fault of the game's fault to some people. That's why I'm throwing my opinion out here. Raging Blast 1 had a more methodical feel to me, because it was harder to chain combos together, as were Raging Blast 2. It's much simpler to do so. For example, there's I can't remember the exact name of the combo. They got weird names for all their little chain attacks in the series, but basically you knock an enemy in the air and then jump and chase after them and start punching them. And in Raging Blast 1, you had to hit them up with the Y button, then hit A, and then go up and follow it up with a Y attack. In Raging Blast 2, you just hit them up with Y and then just keep hitting Y when you're holding up, and it's way too simple. There's no, you don't have to take your hand off the button, you just keep smacking it. It is kind of made me feel a little bit like I was brain dead while I'm playing against my friends, because there's a whole lack of skill to the game, and the online experience in Raging Blast 1 just appealed to me much more. And I think the connection, it could just be, it's obviously a very subjective experience, and there's very many variables that can be attributed to online connectivity in a game, depending on what kind of day you're playing or how active your internet is at the moment. But my experience, and I played a lot of online with both games, is that Raging Blast 1 had a better connection, and I would usually only play with my buddy Phil, but whenever I went on to fight someone else, it was pretty lag free in Raging Blast 1, but in Raging Blast 2 I had a little bit of lag. It wasn't too bad, but the game would sometimes stutter, so that's something to consider. But to be honest, the online in both games are kind of dead, so you really only want to play online with your friends, to be quite honest. But like I said before, I was discussing this with my brother and my friend Phil, is that the more that you add into a game doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good. They added a lot of things in the Raging Blast 2 that were not in 1, like it was much easier to chase opponents and do the combos, but it made the game far too easy. I can't get a challenge out of computers in that game at all. On the highest setting, I can just destroy them. And in Raging Blast 1, it was much more challenging because it was a bit slower and there was harder to do combos, but there were some, I won't want to say combo cancels, but I guess you could cancel your attacks with some of the signature moves, and that would add a little bit of depth to it, which I enjoyed, but that's my personal preference. So basically, to conclude this video with a good answer for you guys, is I think for me personally, Raging Blast 1 was a more enjoyable experience, and I did play it first. But if you're someone that plays Tenkaichi 3 a lot like now, and is looking to get one of those games if you haven't already gotten it, I'd say Raging Blast 2 is the way to go. I think it's still missing a couple little gameplay tweaks that Tenkaichi 3 had, but you might like it. The graphics are better. I mean, obviously it's HD. But if you were looking for a game that's closer to Tenkaichi 3, Raging Blast 2 is the way to go. But if you haven't really played Tenkaichi style games and you're looking for a Dragon Ball Z game, go pick up Burst Limit. But if you did want to pick up one of those games, then I guess Raging Blast 1 is a better experience, I think. It's just a more well-produced game because it does have some challenge to it. I don't like playing games too often when they don't have any challenge at all, and that's just what I got with Raging Blast 2. But I do think that it's just something you guys really need to try for yourselves because it's very subjective. But I don't know, I tried to give you guys my opinion the best I could. I'm not too good at doing these kind of review type things, if you want to call it reviews, but hopefully it helps some of you out if you were stuck on the fence at all with picking up these purchases. But if you're looking for a Dragon Ball Z game that's, in general, I definitely suggest Burst Limit or the Budokai HD Collection. I think are way better games, but that's just my opinion. I mean, if you're into the 3D games, go pick up Raging Blast 1 or 2 or both of them. They're honestly probably each $20 right now, but if you pick up Raging Blast 2 first, you're not going to be able to go back to 1. I couldn't, when I was going to go record gameplay for this, I couldn't play it too easily. It was still enjoyable, and I could still see why it was a better game in some aspects, but it was just, I was trying to do things that I could do in Raging Blast 2, but I couldn't accomplish them in 1 because they just weren't in the game. But that's basically it for today, guys. Hope I helped any of you out. Hit the like button if you did enjoy the video, and I'll catch you later.